What's going on, everybody? Welcome to PFF Now. I am Trevor Sikkema. To my left and right, we have Brad Spielberger and Doug Kyed. Fellas, very, very excited to be here in the middle seat with you. We're giving Ari the day off today, and obviously we've moved Doug a little bit more towards the analyst chair. I am super excited about this one because it is the recap episode. We have everything in front of us right now. Doug, how has the week been for you, my man? I feel like sleep's got to be at a premium for both of you guys, right?
Yeah, and it's been so busy that I haven't even really been able to go to like a grocery store to stock up on energy drinks or coffee and all those things. So like yesterday, I was in like full on as tired as being at the combine mode. Had to double up on coffee. Today had to go on a walk, grab some monsters. So I'm feeling good now. But yeah, midway through the week, it was a struggle.
Boy, feeling combine mode for both of you, that's dangerous because I know you guys are out, networking, doing your thing till late at night. Brad, are you at the same boat or where's the energy level for you at this point?
Combine mode is a different stratosphere of where I could be, but I will say this. If I told maybe a 20-year-old version of myself that I would have watched 0 college basketball games for the first weekend of March Madness so far, that guy would have been shocked. And I'm not just saying that because the employer is watching. I actually have not watched yet, but I will very soon.
So we're going to be talking about all of the big free agency news. We're going to be recapping a lot of what we saw this week, and especially obviously what happened today because major news came out today. And guys, it's been an unprecedented free agency period. I mean, I know we get excited about this time of year, every time of year, but the quarterback movement, the big time wide receiver changes. I mean, we're talking about franchise faces moving in the league, just looking completely different. I mean, I'll just start it out there because we're going to break a lot of this up into details. But Doug, have you ever seen anything like this, man? It feels crazy what we've watched over these last 5 days.
It really does, and it's starting to feel a little bit more like the NBA with all of the movement that we've seen throughout the years in the NBA with star players changing places. I mean, that's basically what we saw with Russell Wilson. That's what we're seeing. Obviously, a much different situation with Deshaun Watson, but now other quarterbacks could be on the move. Feelings hurt over interest in other quarterbacks. It's even more like a soap opera than it usually is. And yeah, I mean, we'll see if this continues in off seasons in the future. But this has definitely been, I'd say, the craziest off season to date.
So we'll talk quarterbacks, we'll talk wide receivers, and we'll even get to some of your mailbag questions at the end of the show as well. So you guys are going to want to stick around for that. But look, Doug brought it up right there, the Deshaun Watson news. That is the big news of the day. Going from the Houston Texans, waiving his no-trade clause to the Cleveland Browns. But not just that, signing a massive, fully guaranteed contract that goes along with it. Massive price that comes with the price tag there. And so, Brad, I'll start with you. As we see the tweets, the breaking news tweets there, kind of explaining it from Adam Schefter, what were your thoughts when you heard Deshaun Watson was going to the Cleveland Browns, which we were told were out of the running, and then all of a sudden it comes to fruition?
You started to get the feeling this was more of a free agency approach than a trade because of the no trade clause that he had. He was able to dictate terms here, and clearly that turned into forget what players or draft picks you're sending my old organization. What are you doing for me financially? And so that was what led to, like you said, this completely unprecedented 5-year, $230 million deal, fully guaranteed. Kirk Cousins kind of broke the mold with his 3-year fully guaranteed deal. Watson takes it 2 years further, and that $46 million per year average, slightly ahead of Patrick Mahomes at $45 million per year, is not by accident.
Man, so Doug, what are your thoughts on this? The contract, I guess, Brad said that Kirk Cousins kind of started this train. Obviously, Deshaun Watson taking it to another level. Do we think this is going to be the case for quarterback contracts moving forward, or is it going to stay a special case when it happens?
I think you'll start to see these high-profile quarterbacks get the guaranteed deals. And then, beyond the high-profile ones, then, the mid-tier quarterbacks will get it. And then you might start to see the star players at other positions start to get guaranteed contracts. So that is one thing that was kind of a silver lining out of today's news. But I did just want to acknowledge, obviously, before we get into all the football stuff, the financial aspects, everything like that, just that Deshaun Watson is still facing 22 civil lawsuits alleging sexual assault and misconduct. The NFL could choose to suspend him for that and under the league's personal conduct policy. And as part of this whole deal, Watson basically chose to have a $1 million salary during the 2022 season. So if he gets suspended, he would only be getting suspended something like $58,000 per game, something like that. The APY of this deal is $46 million. So if you split that up into, per game, that's about $3 million per game. He's reduced that salary down to the fact that he would only be losing about $58,000 per game. I'm curious to see that if there is a suspension for what Deshaun Watson is facing, if the league also chooses to fine him just to counteract what he did and what his agents did and what the Browns did with that deal, because they were pretty brazen about it as well, kind of bragging that they were able to reduce that salary down to $1 million in 2022. So I'm very curious to see how the NFL does react to that. But, I just feel like we do need to just get that out of the way first. And obviously people do want to hear about football. They do want to hear about the financial aspect. But that part of it, you saw it on social media. A lot of people were saying that's pretty gross. And even just the fact that he was able to get an entirely new contract after sitting out last year, demanding a trade, all of the civil lawsuits that he faces. There was 10 criminal cases as well. It's something that kind of hangs over this whole situation. Just the fact that teams were willing to give up so much and ignore everything else that's going on.
It does feel a little uncomfortable, right? When you look at how the contract was written up, and it's clearly taking this into account, yet they're not really taking it into account when acquiring Deshaun himself in the initial move. Brad, what are your thoughts about this, the contract, and then everything with Deshaun Watson going to Cleveland?
Yeah, I mean, that is the approach is I guess not surprising. It is, like Doug said, I mean, it is kind of circumventing a little bit. So maybe the league tries to counteract, with a fine or something like that. But it's within the letter of the law. It's been the rules of the NFL. So I think that's going to be tough for them to do in the end. But I think the bigger takeaway, too, if we want to jump back to just the football aspect, is we broke down these trades, Russell Wilson versus Deshaun Watson, and you could argue Seattle got a better return for Russell Wilson, a guy who's about 8 years older, and yes, there's obviously plenty of other context, but Houston, after talking up this massive trade deal they needed, 3 first-round picks obviously has not happened since Herschel Walker in 1989. So 3 first-round picks is obviously substantial. But I'm surprised that, young, good players, which Cleveland has an abundance of, cornerback Greedy Williams, some really good players that could have gotten thrown in here. I'm surprised Houston did not get any players in this deal.
Yeah, Brad or Doug, what are your thoughts on that? Because we heard that for the longest time it was going to be premium picks and then probably premium players as well. Do you think that went into maybe why this ended up being a Cleveland deal instead of an Atlanta deal? Or do you think that they had any power or say in that whatsoever? Are you surprised that there weren't any players involved in this trade?
I am surprised, and I was underwhelmed by what the Texans were able to receive for Deshaun Watson, because it started to seem like, even midway through last season, that maybe the Texans were losing some of the power on this deal, but then you saw the amount of teams that were interested in Deshaun Watson, the fact that there was 4 teams involved, obviously the Falcons, the Saints, the Panthers, and then finally the Browns. I thought that they would be able to get more out of this. I thought that it would be 3 first-round picks, at least a second-round pick, then maybe some later-round picks, maybe some players as well. The fact that the Seahawks were able to get a stronger deal for Russell Wilson is very strange, especially given the fact that the Browns were willing to fork over this amount of guaranteed money to Deshaun Watson right away. Just showed how much they really wanted him and showed how much they needed him. So yeah, I was, like I said, a little bit underwhelmed by what the Browns could get, but I think that by the end, the Texans had lost their power in this situation because, as Brad mentioned, it was kind of like a free agency situation. That no trade clause, at that point, the Texans basically couldn't say no to whatever the team that Deshaun Watson chose was going to offer. So in some ways, I guess they got a good deal by getting 3 first-round picks out of it. The Browns could have said, I don't know, we'll give you a second-round pick. What are you guys going to do now? Obviously, it wouldn't be that bad. But, yeah, underwhelmed by the amount that the Texans got. But there's a reason for it, and it is because of that no-trade clause.
What about on the flip side of things? Brad, I'll ask you this one. What about Atlanta and New Orleans? These were the 2 teams that we heard were the actual finalists for Deshaun Watson, and it didn't happen, obviously, for either of these teams. Do you hear anything after the trade went down about what maybe didn't work? on Atlanta's side of things or New Orleans side of things, or how close they actually were? Do you have any information about those two sides of the trades now that they obviously ended up not getting Watson?
It seemed like Atlanta was more confident at the tail end there. He's obviously from Georgia, and it seemed like they thought they were going to get a deal done. I honestly think this contract is what ultimately put it over the top. But I also think, look, Watson and his team understand, you're giving up multiple first-round picks, maybe some young players. Even though the AFC is much better than the NFC, the Falcons and Saints have older rosters. The Saints roster is talented, but a lot of older players. The Falcons roster is both old and not talented. And I just, if it was a football decision, I actually think ignoring everything but what is the roster I'm walking into, Cleveland's a pretty easy decision.
Yeah, I don't think there's any doubt about it. I think people thought that Cleveland could have been a Super Bowl caliber kind of team over the last couple of years with Baker Mayfield and what they believed in him. And so you got to think that if you're plugging Deshaun Watson in, that is still true. But let's talk about Baker. Let's get to the Baker Mayfield side of things, because over, I'll say, the last 48, 72 hours, boy, have things been a roller coaster with Baker Mayfield. I mean, at first it was Baker sending out the statement that it was a goodbye statement before he even got released or traded. And then Cleveland basically saying, nah, we're not getting rid of you. And then obviously the Deshaun situation happens. What do you guys make of this whole roller coaster? How the Browns and Baker Mayfield handled all of this individually, and then we'll get into where you guys think Baker might be going in a little bit. But Doug, I'll start with you on this one. What do you think about the whole Baker Mayfield side of this situation?
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely interesting the way that all of this unfolded, and it's almost cleanest. It's cleaner that the Browns were able to get Deshaun Watson, because if they hadn't been able to get Deshaun Watson in this trade, then they probably still would have had to trade Baker Mayfield, and then they would have had to go out and find another quarterback, or they would have had to find another quarterback and then trade Baker Mayfield. So the fact that they've got the quarterback in place right now almost makes this a little bit easier for them, but I don't think that Baker Mayfield did himself a lot of favors, actually, by releasing that statement before, when the Browns showed interest in Deshaun Watson. I don't think he did himself many favors by requesting the trade either. I don't think that a lot of teams are looking at him very fondly by the way that he reacted to all of this. I think he probably would have been better off waiting it out, staying quiet, waiting to see how the situation unfolded, and then acting from there. Even if he had to request a trade at that point, I think that would have made him look a little bit better. But it's kind of the same way that he's handled things in the past, where he's proactive about things, he's outspoken about things. And in this situation, I mean, he'll probably still wind up getting moved. He'll still be the starter, everything like that. But I just don't know if he helped himself out that much with it.
What about you, Brad? What do you think about this one?
Yeah, I mean, look, I don't want to police someone's behavior or emotions, and I understand it was probably tough, but you look at Matt Ryan, the 2016 MVP, all he did this entire time was actually agree to move a roster bonus due date to a later date. It doesn't change when he gets the cash, but nevertheless, just helps the Atlanta Falcons contractually, says absolutely nothing, and he's been a elite quarterback for 15 years. Just like that kind of juxtaposition I do think is tough. I also, again, speculating, but I think Baker Mayfield making sure it got out there that he wants to go to the Colts of all destinations is so that the draft capital Cleveland gets in return for him is as little as possible.
I mean, let's talk destinations then. I mean, you mentioned Indianapolis. I mean, Baker Mayfield's out there. Jimmy Garoppolo, we think, is as well. A couple of the other quarterbacks have already moved, and I think the other options, Jameis Winston's still out there as well. Marcus Mariota's still out there as well, right? And so there are other quarterbacks that I think can be thrown around in this conversation, but where does Baker Mayfield's name fit? Is there a spot where he is going to have a starting job in the NFL next year? Or do we think that he's going to be competing for a starting job wherever he goes? What do you think about this, Doug?
No, I think he will be the week one starter wherever he goes. And it seems like he's trying to will this whole Colts thing into existence, saying, he's making it very clear that the Colts are where he wants to go. Now, the flip side of that is I'm not quite sure what the Colts' interest in Baker Mayfield is. It's better than what they currently have, which is essentially nothing. So I think that if it does come down to it, then yeah, Baker Mayfield could wind up with the Colts, but we'll talk about this in a little bit. But there are other quarterbacks who could become available that might be more attractive for the Colts. I did reach out to a source and basically said, do you think Baker Mayfield is going to have a strong market? And the response was kind of funny. It was, meh, not really. like, I think that there's going to be teams interested. There was another source who told me that teams absolutely will be interested in Baker Mayfield, but I certainly don't think that the Browns are going to be able to get like a first round pick out of this or anything like that. We might see something similar, I guess, to the Carson Wentz deal for Baker Mayfield. But no, I mean, the Colts are out there, the Seahawks are out there, the Carolina Panthers are out there. It's possible that the Atlanta Falcons eventually will be out there as a quarterback needy team as well. So there's currently, I would say, just as many starting quarterbacks as there are starting quarterback jobs in the NFL. Just some pieces need to shift around to get each one of those starting quarterbacks onto a team. So yeah, I definitely think Baker Mayfield will be a week 1 starter. It's just, at this point, kind of anyone's guess. Like I said, he wants to go to the Colts, but if the Seahawks are willing to give up more for him, he doesn't have that no trade clause. And I'm sure the Browns will be willing to work with him, but I also know that they'll want to get as much back as possible after just giving up what they did for Deshaun Watson.
So let's open it up a little more. Let's take a look at exactly what has happened in the NFL throughout this week. And you've got Russ moving to Denver. You've got Aaron Rodgers staying in Green Bay. You've got Tom Brady coming out of retirement. Obviously, Deshaun going to
Had
Cleveland.
to throw that in.
I did have to throw that in there just to make sure everybody knew. But, Brad, when you look at this landscape as it is right now with all the quarterbacks that moved and the quarterbacks that are still out there, we've talked about Jimmy G for so long. Where does Baker Mayfield and his availability fit with, say, Jimmy G still being out there? Do you think that most teams would rather have Garoppolo and the price that it might take to get him versus Mayfield and maybe a little bit lower price there? Do you have any pulse on this? What do you think?
I will say that I thought Carolina made sense, and shout out to, I think, a follower who commented an article from 2018 when Baker Mayfield was getting drafted. New Carolina Panthers offensive coordinator was then the Giants head coach, and he said Baker Mayfield was his QB 6 in the draft. So I don't think Carolina is a destination for him, but I do. I think Jimmy Garoppolo is probably more attractive. Baker Mayfield has a 1-year, $18.8 million fully guaranteed 5th-year option. Jimmy Garoppolo is basically a 1-year, $24 million contract. Obviously, all these things can change. So that being pretty much equal, I think teams would rather bring in Garoppolo or maybe a Matt Ryan before they bring in a Baker Mayfield.
What happens if Baker's market just bottoms out? Or do we get to that point? Would the Browns cut him? I know it's a fully guaranteed deal, so obviously they wouldn't be saving anything at that point, but what is, and now my mind is just going crazy, what is worst case scenario right now for the Browns? Because the PR is all over the place. Like you said, Doug, you reach out to somebody, it's like, hey, do you have interest in Baker Mayfield? Probably not, but will he get dealt for a 5th round pick at the worst or something like that? Or is there a reality where Cleveland maybe can't get rid of him for what they think and he might be back as a backup or something like that?
No, I think that they will get something. I think worst case scenario is what you just said, if they get a 5th round pick or something for him. I do still think that he'll probably wind up getting dealt for, 2nd round pick, 3rd round pick, something like that. Because I think that the debate over Jimmy Garoppolo and Baker Mayfield is an interesting one, because Jimmy Garoppolo is, I forgot who reported it, I think it was Chris Mortensen, said that the Browns wanted an adult in the room. I mean, we kind of saw how that worked out for Cleveland, but that was in reference, I believe, to Jimmy Garoppolo, where he's the guy with the intangibles, he's the locker room leader, he's the guy that you can trust, but I mean, Baker Mayfield definitely has a higher upside at this point in their careers than Jimmy Garoppolo does, just as a individual entity. You know that Jimmy Garoppolo can lead you into the playoffs, can lead you to a Super Bowl. But I mean, if you just look at, PFF grades basically since Baker Mayfield entered the league and Jimmy Garoppolo entered the league, Baker Mayfield is graded out much better than Jimmy Garoppolo has. I think that when you throw Matt Ryan into the mix, I still think that something could happen there where he has every right to be offended after the Atlanta Falcons went so hard after Deshaun Watson. I think Josina Anderson said that they were ready to give him the keys to the city. They had a bunch of Atlanta celebrities reaching out to him. I mean, how does Matt Ryan feel at this point after all of that happened? So there's still a possibility that, he could get dealt to the Indianapolis Colts. Jameis Winston probably going to go back to the Saints, I would guess, but they're in the mix as well. Marcus Mariota in the mix too. But no, I do think Baker Mayfield winds up getting traded. I do think he winds up being a week 1 starter. I don't think the Browns will be stuck with him. But I just don't like his trade market is not nearly as high after last season than it would have been coming off of the 2020 season. And some of that is due to injury. He played poorly, I think, because that non-throwing shoulder was injured. He tried to play through it. He really did struggle, didn't look like himself. But even before then, there were these flaws in his game where if anything broke down around him, then he kind of played like a chicken with his head cut off. So I think that, there are some issues there beyond just the injuries that he had, just beyond the poor play in 2021. But I also think that the first 3 seasons of his NFL career, he was good enough that the team definitely should be giving him a shot to be a starter.
All right, well, that's enough quarterback talk. Okay, for now. We're going to get back to quarterback talk at some point. We've got some questions from you guys that we're going to get back into that a little bit and kind of explain more what we believe is going to happen around the league with these quarterbacks. But we got to talk about wide receivers. We got to talk about some of the other big deals that we've seen, not just today, but throughout this week. Before we get to that, though, got to tell you guys, if you do not have a PFF subscription, now is the time to get one. If you use the promo code FREEAGENCY30, you are going to get 30% off any PFF subscription, an Edge, an Elite, a College, whatever it is, whatever you use PFF the most for. If you happen to run out of your subscription, this is a great time to get 30% off. Use the promo code FREEAGENCY30 and be able to get those premium stats, the premium articles, the draft guide, the fantasy guide, the in-season betting tools, all that kinds of stuff, and you get it at a discounted price. Let's talk about wide receivers. Davante Adams, it was absolutely hilarious being in the chat watching you guys yesterday as this news broke because I was in my kitchen just making dinner and you guys started talking about Davante Adams and I was like, oh yeah, they're talking about like maybe long-term deal, won't play on the tag. And then you're talking about like him and Derek Carr. I like my ears perked up. I was like, wait, what? And so you guys broke that news to me yesterday like you probably did for a lot of people. But outside of him today, we had a DJ Moore extension. We had Adam Thielen getting restructured. We had Juju Smith-Schuster going to the Kansas City Chiefs, maybe a year too late. But that happened. Brad, I'll start with you. What did you like about what we've seen over the last, I'll give you 24 hours for wide receiver moves?
Yeah, I mean, I know it's kind of my job to be the professional wet blanket because of the area that I cover. Look, Davante Adams is the best receiver in the NFL. I believe that. I'm a Bears fan. I've watched him dominate my team for a very long time. Going to be 30 years old next year, a $28.25 million per year contract on a 5-year deal, the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history, and you're giving up a first and second round pick. I'm not saying it's a bad deal for Las Vegas, but there is absolutely downside risk associated. But nevertheless, the cool thing here is there was always this argument with the DeAndre Hopkins deal that it wasn't really a $27.25 million per year average because that money came on top of 3 old years on a contract. With Adams, that is brand new money on a brand new deal. The game has changed. And so, DJ Moore now joins the $20 million per year conversation. We have a lot of stud 2019 draft pick wide receivers, Deebo Samuel, DK Metcalf, AJ Brown, Terry McLaurin, the list goes on. So the entire landscape of wide receiver now is going to be interesting. Those guys are all going to be making some big money.
Doug, what do you think about this? What do you think about the deal? I gotta wonder if you're gonna be under the wet blanket like Brad is, or if you're gonna hype people up. What do you think about the $28 million a year?
I mean, I think the Raiders basically just had to do it to be competitive, and it is kind of funny because I feel like at a certain point of last night, especially when the news was breaking, hours afterwards, everyone was just super hyped on what the Raiders did. Like, oh my God, they acquired Davante Adams. Like, they're going to be, him and Derek Carr are going to be a machine. Like, they're going to be competitive in the AFC West. And then I think actually the first person that I saw just kind of like be that kind of wet blanket was my buddy Bill Barnwell. And he was like, wait a second, you're giving up a first and second round pick plus all this money to an older wide receiver. Like, are we sure that this is good? And then like that kind of like snapped me out of it a little bit and was like, oh yeah, I guess like I didn't really think of it in that way. I'm curious to see personally on this deal the guarantees on it because I wrote something before the season actually started of all of these different ways that Davante Adams could actually wind up being the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. And so far from what we've seen in this deal, he's hit all of them. Now the final thing here is if he can get like the most guaranteed money out of a wide receiver ever, then yeah, he's the highest paid wide receiver. Brad, do you know something?
It's $67.5 million guaranteed, which is another benchmark that he cleared. So there you go.
Wow.
There we go. So, I mean, yeah, in every single possible way, he's the highest paid wide receiver in the NFL. So I'll have to retweet that piece and be like, oh, he hit everything. So, big ups to Devontae Adams there. I did want to actually chime in on the Juju Smith-Schuster deal as well, because first of all, I like that for the Chiefs. They've needed, Brad is probably tired of me talking about this at this point, but I've been saying for a year now that the Chiefs needed another piece in that offense, and it was blatantly obvious when they lost the Super Bowl to Trevor your Buccaneers. It was blatantly obvious last year that they needed another piece. We'll see if Juju can be that piece, because he was hurt for most of last year, wasn't as effective in 2020. But the most interesting thing here, and Brad can touch on this a little bit more than me, is that the base value of this deal is only $3 million, as you just saw on the screen. It was originally reported as being $10.75 million. I have never seen a contract where 72% of the max value is tied up in incentives. It's just absolutely bonkers. And credit to Juju Smith-Schuster's agents for putting that $10.75 million figure out there first, because way more people are ever going to see that than the $3 million that it actually is. For Juju's case, for the Chiefs' case, they've got to hope that it gets up to that 10.75 amount. But I mean, Juju for $3 million, that's a bargain for the Chiefs.
He signed the Taysom Hill of wide receiver contracts somehow without the position change with the percentages of the contract. Brad, what do you think about these moves?
Yeah, no, it is. It's the biggest disparity between the base value and the up to amount that I've ever seen. I told Doug this earlier. I had an agent reach out to me and say, "Wait till the details come out. You're gonna laugh at this one." And then a couple minutes later, the tweet came out. So I mean, look, again though, I do think there's probably some of these incentives that are probably easier to earn. Guessing it's on the lower side, but what Kansas City probably did here is they made them not likely to be earned, which means they won't count against the 2022 cap to begin the season. Then if Juju earns them, he'll get the cash, and it'll impact the cap, in the annual adjustment after the season. So without getting into the weeds of all that stuff, I think it'll probably have some decent upside for Juju as well. The sell for them, though, like you said, Trevor, this is a year late, because if he came here last year, he probably could have had 1,400 receiving yards, and we'd be talking about him signing a deal for $15 million per year. So he's still crazy young. He still makes more money on Twitch than he does in football anyway. He'll cash out maybe next year.
All right, so before we get to your mailbag questions, I do want to touch on some of the free agents that are still out there. We've got guys like Teron Armstead, Lyle Collins, OBJ. We've got Stephon Gilmore, Jadeveon Clowney, Akeem Hicks. There's Bobby Wagner. There's a lot of big-name guys that are still out there in free agency. Doug, I'll start with you. Anybody really stand out that you're either surprised hasn't signed yet or you're anticipating signing soon? Anything like that amongst that group?
Well, first of all, I mean, the common thread there is that almost all of those guys are 30 years or older. And I think that is something that you're really seeing in the NFL, is that 30-year-old age is a threshold for where teams are willing to sign you right away, unless you're a quarterback, sign you right away, pay you big money. But the one that really stands out to me is Stephon Gilmore, because I thought that he played well last season with the Carolina Panthers. I know he's had some injuries over the last couple of years, but I mean, this is a guy who's 2 years removed from being the NFL Defensive Player of the Year. And his play really hasn't dropped off since then either. So I know there's been some varying reports on, the Las Vegas Raiders' interest in Stephon Gilmore, but there's a lot of these cornerbacks who are still out there. Dante Jackson, another former Panther, Mike Hughes still out there, Stephon Gilmore still out there. Seems like that's been a little bit of a slow-moving market, but we'll see if some of these deals do start to perk up a little bit now that the quarterbacks are coming out, that Deshaun Watson is settled, and now we'll start to see these other quarterbacks get settled, and teams will know how much money they have to work with.
Brad, what do you think?
For me, it's Teron Armstead, because I think that this Deshaun Watson decision has massive implications on his decision now. I mean, I'm sure he wasn't just going to try to return to the New Orleans Saints just because of one other player, but even on the Saints front now, I mean, are you going to give him, he probably deserves $20 million or more per year. You already have the highest paid right tackle in the NFL in Ryan Ramczyk at over $19 million per year. Do they even want to now bring him back with, Jameis Winston or whoever they have at quarterback? And I think there are a handful of teams that could then be in the mix there. Maybe, the Colts try to sign him, replace Eric Fisher, and use that as a kind of a way to attract the quarterback to the mix. I think a ton of teams are now going to be calling Teron Armstead. That's one that jumps out to me now.
All right, let's get to the mailbag questions from you guys. You submitted them, I believe, yesterday. The first one that we want to get to deals with the NFL draft, and it's up at the very top. We think the Jacksonville Jaguars at this point are still going to go with Aiden Hutchinson, the Michigan pass rusher, at number 1 overall. But if that's the case, an interesting question comes up. Who do the Lions take it to? Because I feel like in a lot of mock drafts that we read, it's been very easy before free agency to just give the Jaguars an offensive tackle and then have Aiden Hutchinson go into the Lions. And the explanation, the blurb underneath, it's very easy. Dan Campbell's going to love Aiden Hutchinson, of course. It's a no-brainer here. But what if he's not on the board? What happens then? Brad, I'm going to start with you. Where do you think the Lions go at this point in time, about a month out from draft weekend?
I'll save the more fun answer for Doug. This reminds me of when the Lions were picking 3rd overall a couple of years ago, and they definitely probably tried to move down. They were not able to do so. They took Jeffrey Okudah, the cornerback out of Ohio State. I'm not saying this in hindsight because he hasn't had a great start to his career, but I do think they probably tried to move down. In my opinion, if Hutchinson's not there, the Lions have one of the best offensive lines in football already. So guys like Ikem Ekwonu and Evan Neal and all those guys are kind of less attractive, and I would try as hard as possible to trade down in the draft. That's my boring answer for you there.
All right, Doug, what about you? He said you have an exciting answer, so now I got to hear it.
Well, I mean, the exciting answer is Malik Willis, and that is something that's gaining steam around the NFL. I know that, we heard it at the NFL Scouting Combine that, and it makes sense to some degree. I know that Malik Willis isn't held in as high of a regard as some of these quarterbacks that came out in the past, but if you trade down in your Detroit, there's a chance that you might not get him. And if you really like a quarterback, you should probably take him, especially when you've got another pick in the first round. You've got the 32nd overall pick. You've got the 34th overall pick in the second round. You've got other opportunities to make plays at other positions. So I know that, it might be taking a quarterback a little bit high given who Malik Willis is, but I think that that's at least a possibility. I will say, though, I was talking to a scout today, just via text. I was asking about some other things. I said, do you think this whole Malik Willis at 2 thing is real? And he threw a little bit of water on it. I'm not saying he's not someone who would necessarily be in the know. He said that he thought that the range for Willis would be more like somewhere in the 7 to 15 range. And he actually said that he thought it would have to be an offensive lineman for the Lions at number 2 overall, which I think would come as a pretty big surprise to a lot of people, given the fact that they did draft Sewell last season. They've still got Taylor Decker on the other side at left tackle. But, I mean, a guy like Ikem Ekwonu, a guy like Evan Neal, I think that those guys could easily kick over to guard early in their career, maybe slide over to tackle once Taylor Decker's out of there. Then they've got those 2 bookend tackles. There's some logic to it. I'm not saying that that's going to happen. I'm not saying that I think that's what should happen, but I've got a friend who's a Lions fan who saw Ekwonu as the number 2 pick in a mock draft, and he was ready to lose his mind over it. So I think that Lions fans should at least just like think about it as a possibility. Think about the strengths of it. Think about the pluses rather than all the minuses there.
As someone who writes a lot of mock drafts, someone losing their mind over a mock draft is pretty on brand, actually. So that actually checks out. Next question we got to get to. We talked about this a little bit. It's about Baker Mayfield. And this question was, what do you realistically think happens for Baker? I know we talked about the Baker discussions and what could be for him, but I'll put you guys on the spot. Now, obviously, you're not putting your mortgage on the line or anything, but I'll rephrase the question. Baker Mayfield is playing for what team in week 1 this upcoming season? Doug, I'll start with you.
Seattle Seahawks. That's
okay. All right.
It feels right. Another shorter quarterback. I know the Seahawks like him, so I'll keep it short like that. No pun intended. The Seahawks.
Okay. All right, Brad, what do you think?
Yeah, so Doug mentioned this. From 2018 to 20, Mayfield had an 83 grade in our system. He was our 13th graded quarterback. Last year was a 62.4. He was 28th, but there is promise there. He was good to start off his career. I'll send him to the Colts. They love a reclamation project as much as anyone.
Okay. All right. We got the Colts and the Seahawks. I had to switch the question up a little bit because it's like, is he going to stay? Is he going to go? We know he's going to go somewhere, but that makes it a little fun. I might throw Carolina in there just to spice it up, just because I have no idea what the Panthers are doing at this point. Sam Darnold versus Baker Mayfield. would actually
No
be
one
kind of
does.
hilarious as a camp battle there. Okay, so the next question. This is a good transition into the Seahawks portion of our little mailbag here. Do you see the Seahawks putting a dent in all that cap space they have? So I believe the last time I looked, the Seahawks have the second most cap space in the NFL, right behind the Indianapolis Colts. So, Brad, are we going to see the Seahawks open up the checkbook? What are they doing?
They've actually made a couple cuts even since that person sent in that question. They moved on from Carlos Dunlap and Kerry Hyder today, but I think they're going to, and I think the Matt Ryan thing is interesting. I saw Josina Anderson put out that there's at least been an inquiry phone call. I think an interesting connection there is former Falcons head coach Dan Quinn, obviously came from Seattle before being Matt Ryan's head coach for a long time in Atlanta, so there's definitely some connections there, and they're looking for a bridge anyway. I put this tweet out. You had Russell Wilson on a 2-year, $51 million deal remaining. He obviously would have wanted an extension. Matt Ryan has 2 years, $51.75 million remaining on his deal. Maybe Seattle says, look, we got a massive trade haul for Russell Wilson. We can send like a third-round pick, maybe a second-round pick to get Matt Ryan. Still have a bridge. Well, yeah, we don't know about the value, but still have a bridge to the next guy with a veteran that can compete right now. I think it's an interesting idea.
Doug, what do you think?
I think it actually depends on what they do at quarterback, because if they're able to get someone like Matt Ryan who can make them competitive again, then yeah, I think it makes sense to go out there and try to get Stephon Gilmore or get some of these free agents who are out there that could actually help them and help them compete for a playoff spot in 2022, not to use Pete Carroll's favorite word, compete. But if they don't find that quarterback, and if they have to roll with Drew Lock and they draft Desmond Ridder, or if they draft Malik Willis or whoever it would be, then I don't think it makes sense to use that cap space. Roll it over into 2022, build your team up, save as much cap space as possible to sign all the free agents when you're actually ready to be competitive. Tank as much as possible. I know that they're not going to try to lose games or anything like that, but if they can't get the quarterback who's going to make them competitive, to me, it makes sense to save all the cap space and roll it over into the future.
Pete Carroll's favorite word is only compete because it has his first name in it. Hello, people. Pay attention here. Follow the signs. Okay, for this final question, I got to read it because it's worded in a really good way that poses a really great question. How do you feel about the Cardinals' comp pick approach to free agency? With 2 future third-round picks on the line, they seem to be only targeting their own players and those who have been released, which goes in the comp pick formula. Is this a viable strategy? Brad, I'll start with you.
Yeah, this is what the New England Patriots and Baltimore Ravens and a couple other clubs have been doing for the last 20 years, and it's a very smart approach. So what he's getting at here is because Chandler Jones and Christian Kirk signed their monstrous contracts elsewhere, the Cardinals would currently be in line to receive a third-round comp pick in the 2023 draft for those losses. But if they were to go out and make big splash signings, it would cancel those out. So you don't cancel out if you sign your own free agents, or if you sign guys that got cut, they also do not factor in. So it is a smart strategy. It's a smart approach. I actually can mention one guy we should have mentioned in the last segment. The Seattle Seahawks brought Trent Brown in. He's an example of a guy that would not count. Maybe bring him in to play right tackle. That could be an interesting move. But yes, it is a very smart approach. It is what the smartest and sharpest organizations have done for a long time.
Doug, what do you think?
Yeah, and as Brad mentioned, this is what the Patriots have done all these years, and I think that they're probably in the middle of doing it right now. They lost J.C. Jackson in free agency. If they don't sign a similar free agent, which at this point there's really none left on the market, then they'll get a third-round pick for J.C. Jackson. They also lost Ted Karras, so they could wind up getting a sixth-round pick, something like that, for Ted Karras. It's basically, if you're smart about it, then it's free draft picks if you weren't going to sign players anyway, or if you can find those guys who were cut by other teams who can wind up being just as good. So, I know personally I've got a bunch of Patriots fans who follow me right now. They're all losing their minds over the fact that the Patriots have not done anything other than sign low-level free agents and their own free agents. But there's a method to the madness. The Patriots spent a ton of money in free agency last year. They were not going to get comp picks because they did that. This year, They knew that they were going to wind up losing bigger free agents than they were going to wind up gaining. So this is the approach that makes sense to get that free third-round pick. I mean, that being said, you have to hit on the picks, and that's something that a team like the Patriots and even like the Cardinals haven't done a very good job of doing over the last 5, 6, 7 years. So that's the other part of it, is that you actually have to hit on those comp picks, but the strategy is sound. It's a smart approach if you can do that.
Listen, following the Patriots model doesn't always work outside of New England, but I do think that that is a pretty good strategy, being able to take that away. If you're not going to sign free agents, you might as well get the draft picks for it. So, guys, any parting thoughts as we are here, end of day 5 of free agency, about to wrap this show up? Brad, anything else before we get out of here?
Oh, put me on the spot. No, I do. I think that there's.
You don't have to break. You don't have to break any news or anything. You don't have to release any kind of hidden treasures. But
I just think that the weekend is going to be busy. I think there is a lot more to come. I think we're going to see a lot of deals. And I mentioned Matt Ryan has a contract trigger. Daniil Hunter also has a contract trigger where they have to make a decision on him by Sunday. He has his $18 million roster bonus that is due that day or earned that day. There is a lot more to come.
Doug, any final words for me?
I mean, the craziness is just beginning. With everything that we already talked about, I mean, I know that this week was insane. So many things happened. So many things broke. But now, think about all the quarterbacks that we were just talking about who are now going to be on the move because Deshaun Watson was traded. I was ready to have a pretty calm weekend. I thought that Deshaun Watson wasn't going to make his decision until Monday. Now we're going to be like, this weekend is possibly going to be just as crazy as this week was if Jimmy Garoppolo, Baker Mayfield get traded, Jameis Winston signs, Marcus Mariota signs. That's before we even get to Matt Ryan. So, I mean, yeah, my parting thought would be to just keep it on PFF.com. There's going to be plenty of news and analysis coming at you for the next week with everything else that's going to happen.
Yeah, if anybody's watching this YouTube show and you guys don't already follow Brad and Doug and Ari as well on Twitter, you got to do so, because I was about to tell these guys, hey, get some extra sleep tonight, but maybe that's not going to be the case. Maybe we're going to get some more quarterback news. As we mentioned, there's a lot of big-name free agents that are still out there. Gentlemen, thank you so much for giving us your knowledge all week. It's been fantastic to follow you guys, get all those contract details, everything, man. For Brad Spielberger, for Doug Kyed, I am Trevor Sikkema. Thank you for watching PFF Now. We'll see you guys next time.